Hi, 7th graders. We are on lesson 3-2, which is estimating square roots. It's on page 140 in your textbook, so you can follow along if you would like to. You should also have your notebook out taking notes as you're watching this video, as well as your vocabulary sheet and filling in the vocab words that come about in this lesson. And if you didn't do it for lesson 3-1, you should go back and make sure that you do that as well. Okay? So we can remember what we talked about in 3-1. We talked about perfect squares. Remember, in a perfect square is a rational number whose square root is an integer. Okay? So all of these numbers, so we would say 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, and so on, are all perfect squares because if you take the square root, that 4 is messed up right there. If you take the square root of it, you get an integer. So we know the square root of 4 is 2 because 2 squared, or 2 times 2, equals 4. We know the square root of 16 is 4 because 4 squared, or 4 times 4, equals 16. Remember, 4 squared is 4 times 4, not 4 times 2. Okay, the power tells us how many times we're multiplying our factor. Okay, so I want you to take a minute and pause me and copy down this entire chart. This is super important for you to have in your notebook. Okay, so just to recap, remember our perfect squares are our number. For example, down here, 25 is a perfect square since the square root of 25 equals 5. Okay? So what happens when we're given a number to find the square root of and it's not a perfect square? Estimate each square root to the nearest whole number. So let's try to figure out what the square root of 15 would be. Okay, well, if we look here at the square root of 1 and the square root of 4, we know that the square root of 2 and the square root of 3 is going to fall in between 1 and 2 somewhere. We know that because, again, the square root of 1 is 1, square root of 4 is 2, and the square roots of numbers also go in numerical order. So the square root of 2 and the square root of 3 has to fall in between the square root of 1 and the square root of 4. Even though they're not going to be a whole number or it's not going to be an integer, it still is going to be something in between 1 and 2. Okay? Just like the square root of 6, for example, would fall in between the square root of 4 and the square root of 9. So it's asking us to find the square root of 15. Well, I know that 15 is super close to 16. It's actually 1 less than 16. So the square root of 15 is going to fall super, super close to the square root of 16, also telling us that it's going to be super close to 4. Okay? It's not 4. It's 3 point something, 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 but it's really close to 4. So if we're rounding to the nearest whole number, okay, I'm guessing it's 3.8 or 3.9 something. So if I was going to round, then I would round to 4. So the square root of 15 is approximately, we don't write equals, we write approximately 4. What about the square root of 130? Well, 130, we look at our square roots, and I see, 130 is between 121 and 144. So I know that it's going to be in between 11 and 12. So the answer is going to be 11 point something, okay? 11 point whatever number times 11 point whatever number equals 130. Well, 120 to 130 is a difference of 9. 130 to 144 is a difference of 14. So that tells me that it's closer to 121, which means that it's less than halfway towards 12. So if I was going to round it, I would round down to 11. So 130, or the square root of 130 is approximately 11. Okay? And because it's not telling us to give the negative answer, we're just giving the positive. Okay? But remember, every square root has a negative answer as well. Negative 11 times negative 11 is 121, which is also close to 130. Okay? Square root of 97. So looking back up here, I know the square root of 97 is going to fit right in between here because it's less than 100. Okay? It's very close to 100, which means that it's very close to 10. So if I was going to round to the nearest whole number, square root of 97 is approximately 10. Okay? In Little League, the bases are squares with sides of 8 inches. The expression, the square root of s squared plus s squared represents the distance across the square of side length s. It's usually a different number, but I changed it for our purposes to make it so we can use the table that we just created. Okay, so I know that so I'm going to rewrite this, I'm going to rewrite my formula. But I know that S is my side length, and on here my side length is 8. So I'm just going to fill this in for S. So 8 squared plus 8 squared. Okay, we do everything in parentheses first, if you remember back to order of operations. So 8 squared is 64. So I have the square root of 64 plus 64. My next step is to do everything under my radical sign. So 64 plus 64 equals, well, I know 60 plus 60 is 120, and then I have 4 left to add from each. So that would make it the square root of 128. Okay, and it says estimate the distance across. So the square root of 128 would actually be right near 130. Okay, so 128 is going to go right in between here. I know that 128 is closer to 121 than it is to 144. So my answer is going to be approximately 11. So I do my approximately sign. Approximately 11 inches, because we always put our label. Okay? Next, order from least to greatest. So we have 7, 9, square root of 50, and square root of 85. Okay? Well, I know that I already know that we have 7 and we have 9. So I know that the square root of 50, if I look back up here, is just after the square root of 49. So that means it's going to be 7 point something, something, something. Okay? So since it's really close, I'm going to say, so I remember, that it's approximately like 7.1. Okay? Square root of 85 is just after the square root of 81. Okay, it's not as close as the square root of 50 is to the square root of 49, but it's pretty close to the square root of 81. It's greater than 9 because it's in between 9 and 10. Okay, it's going to go right about there. So to estimate, we can estimate and say that the square root of 81 is about 9.3, maybe not even that much, okay? Just so we can know, just so we can have it a little bit easier to put them in order. Well, now I can see that 7 is less than 7.1, so we have 7. And then we have the square root of 50 because we write it back in its original form. Then we have 9. Then we have the square root of 85. Okay? That's one way that you could have done it. The other way that you could have done it is changed these into square roots. So 7 is the same as the square root of 49. And 9 is the square root of 81. And then I can go that way and I know, oh, the square root of 50 is going to go right in between here. And the square root of 85 then will go right in between there. And then we would convert these back and write it just like this. Okay, so I rewrote our table just so we have it to use for our next ones. Okay, and I want you, using your table, I want you to solve number 1 and number 2. Estimate square root of 83 and square root of 23.5. Do that in your notes. So I know the square root of 83 is really close to the square root of 81. It's about right here. So it is very close to 9. So approximately 9 would be our answer. Square root of 23.5. Okay, 23.5 is really close to 25. So if I'm rounding to the nearest whole number, it's going to be approximately 5. Okay? And then 3 more and then we're done. Square root of 35, square root of 44.8, square root of 170. Do this really quick in your notebook. Please write the question or the problem down as well as the answer. So square root of 35 is super close to the square root of 36. So I would round up, and the square root of 35 is approximately 6, because it's very close to 36. 6 squared equals 36. Okay? 44.8, I know, is very close to 49, and it's closer to 49 than it is to 36. So we're going to round up to approximately 7. And then I have the square root of 170, which is super close to the square root of 169. So this is approximately 13, because 13 squared is 169, which is super close to 170. If you have any questions or any problems or anything that we went over that you are still a little bit confused on maybe, go back and read the chapter, or the lesson, sorry, for 3-2 and write down on your notebook what you are curious about or wondering about. And then don't forget to go on to NICU and take the 3-2 quiz.